So I guess I want to do this talk, but I wanted to do it when I kind of felt like I was in a better mood to do this talk and get my notes out and get everything together that I wanted to mention in it and not forget anything. But I just kind of want to get something down now. So I basically discovered this William Prynne. I should have already really been aware of him, but not as a lawyer. In a way, he's getting overshadowed in his name by William Penn, because it sounds a bit like William Prynne, William Penn. If you say William Penn quite quickly, William Penn, it's a bit like William Prynne, right? Prynne. So, he actually was a member of Parliament as well. Well, this is what it says about him here, but I read this after I've read his actual book that he wrote, because his book that he wrote doesn't mention anything about him himself being in Parliament. So William Prynne was a member of the Long Parliament and the Convention Parliament, right? Prynne was elected to the Long Parliament in November 1648 as a member of Parliament for Newport in Cornwall. Prynne was a prominent figure in the Long Parliament, writing pamphlets and chairing of the Commons Committee of Accounts. Prynne was arrested and imprisoned in Pride's Purge on December the 6th, 1648. Prynne was a member of the Convention Parliament of 1660. Prynne supported the restoration of King Charles II to the throne. Charles II rewarded Prynne with the office of the Keeper of the Records in the Tower of London in 1661. Prynne was a lawyer and a pamphleteer who was active during the English Civil War. He was a prominent Puritan who opposed Archbishop William Laud and the church policy of the time. Well, that's quite... He's a bit of a contradictive character in a way, because it was Cromwell and basically the Roundheads, when they overthrew the crown, who tried Laud, William Laud, the Archbishop of Canterbury, basically got executed, didn't he? And that was the Roundheads who did that. So William Prynne's very interesting because his religious views really were against the Archbishop of Canterbury, who got executed. Yet he was a royalist and supported the Restoration. So he's kind of a little bit like one of these sort of kind of like he's sort of either playing both sides or not on a side, if you know what I mean. He's caught up in the whole kind of thing, which is a little bit like some people now. You know, you've got Extinction Rebellion, you've got Just Stop Oil for the environment, but then you've got like Stop ULEZ, who are opposing Sadiq Khan and all these ridiculous charges on the roads and all the cameras everywhere. And then you've got like Big Brother Watch with all this surveillance that they're opposing. A lot of people are caught in the middle of all this, which is, I think, what the government want. They're to be, or else won't be pushing all these things and confusing people. And given the fact that the government is corrupt and a lot of the legislation is contradictive, Constitution's been broken, and they still want to continue and try and wade through the mire, which is corrupt. When they're pushing all these agendas, these C30, C40 cities or whatever, these Agenda 2030s and all these other things that, Tony Blair and Davos are desperately trying to push on us, getting rid of money and all these other things, when they're literally operating corrupt governments illegally, and they don't. It doesn't look like they're going to confess. These big bureaucrats, police, the Crown Prosecution Service, these huge institutions which have been breaking the law. Like this big post office scandal as well. A lot of people got prosecuted, and then apparently they went and sorted it out afterwards. But yet, it's looking like all these bureaucrats in government are going to get away with corruption unless something's done. You know, so coming back to Prynne again, he seems like, you know, he's got his own opinions and views, which could be either side depending on what the situation is and depending on what the view is, right? Now, when I first started reading about Prynne, I read his books, and I just happened upon these books because I found a book on eBay, right? It's a book of writs, because I'm looking for like writs of privilege, right? To do with Parliament, and Prynne's got this big 4-volume book section that he's been through all the roles in the Tower of London, right? He went through the whole history, and put all these books together out of very meticulously commented and recorded and got you know, pieces of information, lots and lots of laws and writs and things like that, because he wanted to prove the true history of England, basically, and the true laws of England. Now, a lot of people have heard of this Sir William Cook. Well, Prynne writes his name Cook. When Prynne refers to him, he calls him Sir William Cook, right? But he's more known as Sir William Cook. It's spelt Cook, right? And whenever you know, it's a name that you hear a lot. People quote this Sir William Cook a lot, right? And he did a lot of books. But what William Prynne is saying, because this Cook guy was a little bit before Prynne, because he'd already done his books, right? And he'd meant to have like studied the rights and the laws of England, and he's also active in government, right? But what Prynne does is Prynne says basically that, you know, Sir William Cook wasn't that accurate or necessarily that correct in his writings. And what he does is he criticises Sir William Cook's work and his law work and his books and his writings, and he says that he wants to correct some mistakes, errors, or oversights that Cook did in his books, right? So as a lawyer and also studying at Lincoln's Inn, William Prynne, I think he wanted to do a lot better job than this Sir William Cook guy did, right? And what happened is, obviously, William Prynne was, I think, born 1600, and so that, like, literally the turn of the century. So he grew up, and then he was caught up in the whole Civil War and everything. Now, leading up to the Civil War, you had these other two important cases, John Bastwick and Henry Burton, okay, who were physicians and clergymen, right? One of them's a physician, one's a clergyman, but they're both religious, and they're both into pamphleteering and putting religious views out there, and they both end up getting put in prison and getting their ears chopped off, and in that I think they go before that Star Chamber. But one of them, Henry Burton, he nearly ends up being the Archbishop of Canterbury. I think he got quite high up in the clergy, and those two guys, their wives ended up petitioning the House of Commons to get their husbands released, which they did through, you know, like when John Pym was in Parliament. So this William Prynne, he was in some sort of connection or correspondence, or he was involved in all these events around John Bastwick and Henry Burton as well, right? So he's kind of active. But in his books, what I've read so far, or in those calendar volumes of writs, he hasn't mentioned Parliament or anything like that. I think they're a bit earlier, but he does say that he because he's actually publishing all these books about the history and laws of England and the truth of it, right? He's kind of like attracting a lot of attention, and I think that it basically like the Cromwell government wasn't too keen on it, right? And he ended up getting put in. He ended up getting arrested unlawfully on a very tenuous, dubious warrant, which basically wasn't legitimate, and he got. I think it was like 3 years, right? He was put in these, like, he says that he was moved around to 3 different castles, right, over 3 years or something, when he hadn't even done anything wrong. And he's actually meant to be educated in law, someone who knows what he's talking about with the law, right? So, but as it says here, if this is accurate, it's saying that he actually supported the restoration of the crown, but he was never a supporter of this William Laud, the Archbishop, who got executed by Cromwell's government. So he's kind of a little bit like, maybe he's straight down the middle, you know, maybe he's like straight down the middle. But in his books, he professes and he gives these statements in his books, like, you know, he signs it off kind of like, you know, your friend Will, right? You know, and he promises in his books that he intends to set out the truth and the facts, basically, and go through the history and the law and tell it how it is, right, without being biased. And it seems like he does that. There seems to kind of be a few contradictions in his books, but I think he's speaking from other people's points of views and putting other opinions on what other people say, and then he kind of like puts a counterpoint or whatever. But there's quite a lot to actually say about it. Now, in a way, what I've happened upon in my own current study is that I found things in the law that are wrong, that have been done wrong or in error or unlawfully, like this removal of the life peer privileges, right, in 1948, and then I think in 1967, the Criminal Law Act, when Queen Elizabeth has scrapped the life peer privileges, when you can't really do that because they're still open in Parliament with all ancient rights and privileges. And then we've got like this Kim Leadbeater pushing this, pushing through this assisted suicide bill when you can't really do that because life's a protected characteristic through the religion and all this. What William Prynne actually sets out in his work is really how the government started, not really into the Edward Confessor laws, but there are the Edward Confessor laws that you can get into if you want to read them, but we're talking about kind of like from the conquest sort of onwards, and maybe some of the terminology which is adopted, but it mainly around, you know, what's happening sort of after the conquest, and then when they're having these great councils and, you know, they're knocking around having meetings with the church and they're deciding, you know, how the country's going to be. Although obviously there was a system of government in place, but he just explains how they're basically going around and holding these great councils, basically, and how they end up turning into the Parliament, basically, right? So there's a few things that he's found when he was in the 1640s, right? He's found things also similar to I found things now, which have been doing questionably wrong through the 1940s, 1960s, 1970s, which I'm like, how have they done this or that when they can't do it, right? And they're still trying to do stuff now in Parliament, which you can't do. So Prynne's basically done that, you know, but he was doing that in 1640s, way before William Penn, you know, that's 1670, right? So, and what he was saying is, so hold on a minute, there's a few different things that is worth mentioning. and I don't know what order to go through them in, because you can go through them in a different order or whatever. So I'll just try and reel off what I can remember at the moment, what I want to get down to mention. And if anyone can learn these things if they read Prynne. But the thing is, I've now discovered that besides those calendar tables that he's done of writs, he's actually got a hell of a lot of work and publishing and writing in his in his citation index. He's got like literally, hundreds of publishings that he did, and I've got there's some of the books I had to get, but I'm really more interested in his work on political rights, because this guy was basically writing about the right to petition and things like that. And so, but before the 1688 Bill of Rights, and actually, it turns out that this guy is a key figure in the Tumultuous Petitioning Act, ironically, but he's meant to be a lawyer and he's meant to be kind of pro-rights, but it seems that his position is like to use rights but not abuse rights, okay? And actually, I think that him writing all the books and drawing the attention to them, whenever you raise awareness about rights and the public using them, that there's always alarm bells ringing with the government, right? Even now, we're trying to get them through the courts. We're trying to get the rights recognised in the courts, because we've got problems like, William Penn later on in 1670 had problems getting his rights recognised in the courts. And we're having problems now, even in, 2025. The courts are just defiant. You'd have thought that, human evolution and progress would have, prospered, but it seems not. It's utterly corrupt, and people don't seem to understand or know the law, even still, or they don't want to. And, well, that's what we can get into. We could do this like the start of the Tumultuous Petitioning Act to the finish of the Tumultuous Petitioning Act, which marks the invention of the Crown Prosecution Service, which is the point where I think that it's become institutionally corrupt now, because the government don't want to be prosecutable or liable. And if you've got an entire government which is privileged, the entire bureaucrats and staff, you've literally got a regime, right? You ain't got a democracy. It's going to be elected MPs who have got privilege, or people who are executing due process, not like, an entire regime. It's not, a regime. People have got to be accountable when they're sat pushing pens in offices and not doing process properly for us. So, anyway, Prynne, one of Prynne's main claims up to this point, what I found, is that he's saying that even though he supports the Royalists and the Restoration, he's saying that through his academic studies, at Lincoln's Inn, when he's writing his books and when he's been studying all the roles in the Tower, and he claims to put an honest opinion over, right, and correct Sir William Coke in a lot of his work. He's saying that prior to Queen Elizabeth the First, they didn't have oaths, or they didn't have hardly any oaths, or not any oaths that he knows of for serving in Parliament, right? So, and apparently, I think there were still some clans in Ireland up till the time of Elizabeth I. Apparently, the whole of the far side of Ireland hadn't completely and utterly been conquered. There were still a few clans knocking around, right up until the time when really we went over to America, and the first pilgrims went over to America. So it's an interesting time. So what his claim is that the oaths didn't come in until Queen Elizabeth I, right? And he's claiming that really the oaths are only got implemented, in his opinion, not because of this obedience to the king and his heirs and successors and so forth, just for the sake of some kind of sort of military allegiance or magic, or some kind of hive consciousness where we've all got to salute the flag and sing the national anthem, but they're claiming it was because of religious threats, right? Because it's this whole thing to do with like the Pope, right, versus the Protestant religion when we become independent, right? And then they got the Popish plot and everything like that, and they didn't want anyone in the government siding with the Pope over the King, right? That's what Prynne's claim is. Now, but also what Prynne points out is that they're calling these grand councils, right? And they call the early parliaments, but they didn't call it. The word parliament didn't come in until something like Henry III or something like that, right? He's saying that the word parliament or parler is French, right, for to talk, to come and talk, to come and discuss, to come and meet, right? But that French word wasn't introduced until later, to use that terminology, although they were still having these grand councils and meetings, but they were just calling it different names and terms. So you've got all these, the Anglo-Saxon name and terms for them and so forth, right? But what he was really interested in is who was being summoned to these meetings and councils and how did it turn into the parliament, right? Now, it looks like when they hold these grand councils at different places around the country, they're actually calling these barons, right? They're calling these barons in, mainly the barons. But the word barons wasn't really being used when they were being summoned to these grand council meetings. There was some clergy summoned, but mainly the barons. Now, the word baron, they're saying that it only really appeared in the charters, like in Magna Carta and in all these big charters and so forth. They referred to them as the barons, but when they called them to these council meetings, like parliaments, they didn't call them barons, but they referred to them as chevalier, like chivalry, chevalier, which is. That term actually is originated to horse, but it's somewhere like a knight, right? Or also miles. They've got this word miles, which is like maybe 1,000 steps or measurement. I think it might be something like maybe like we have the hundreds courts, right? Which is an area of land, 100, kind of like you've got an acre and then 100, right? But 1,000's like more than 100, isn't it? So it's more like grander steps or grander rulings than the hundreds courts. Something in and around that for meaning, but they're basically the knights. So really the word, the barons actually really are referred to kind of as knights, really, not necessarily barons, but they end up becoming landowners, don't they? But you've already got your Anglo-Saxon landowners, but a lot of the Normans took over the ownership of the lands and deposed them and removed them and took over their lands, right? So it's mainly then the military knights who are more or less to become the main land stakeholders, right? So they're mainly the ones who come to these grand councils, but then they have these meetings, which the word parliament ends up later on getting substituted for the word that they're using before it, right, which is usually in Latin. And these are mainly not actually knights or barons who are attending. They're actually mainly clergy or basically the leaders of the church or religion, right? Now, in like abbots, bishops, and so forth. Now, you got to understand that when we get conquered, when William the Conqueror comes in, they've already got the churches and they've already got, bishops and abbots, and some of it was conferred with the Pope anyway, right? The Christian religion is already well established, even in Wales and possibly even in Scotland before the conquest, right? So you've already actually got the religion and the religious leaders. So it's more purely a military ownership takeover with William the Conqueror, And it seems like these Grand Councils, the knights, or if you want to refer to them as barons being called, but they're only referred to as barons in the charters, right? Not in these writs of summons. But when they have these other type of meetings, which are more like what end up being the parliaments, it's all of the religious leaders who are meeting with the king, right? Abbots and bishops, like, Archbishop of Canterbury, York, and so forth. So it's actually, it's mainly a meeting of religious leaders from the church. Now, there's something notable about this, because you've only got two types of people, therefore. You've got people who lead people, right? People who lead people, and people who own lands and control lands. So you've got people who control lands, and you've got people who control people. They're the people who are getting called to these meetings. And the Grand Councils tend to be the landowners, the baron knights who have taken over the lands and therefore control and own the lands and say what happens on the lands, right? And then the spiritual people are the leaders of the people, because they control the people, right? The congregations, right? And people's, the spiritual leaders of the people, right? So this is your distinction between owners of land, a military power, control of lands, and then spiritual people who control all of the people, right? And then, so when it actually, when it becomes, more and more a consolidated parliament rather than these great councils, it ends up being a bit of a blend then. But apparently they're saying that none of the, he's claiming that no one became barons until they were actually all spiritual leaders. So I'm not too sure about that. I thought they were all mainly military people, but he's claiming that the majority of them actually were spiritual leaders. So the early King's Council and the early parliaments really was mainly Lord Spiritual. And it's ironic now that in this current modern parliament that we've got, you've got very few Lord Spiritual, or hardly any Lord Spiritual left, very, very few. And they don't really seem to do much anymore. And it's mainly full of the House of Lords now is just full of businessmen. It's bursting at the seams with businessmen, lords and barons, less Lord Spiritual, extremely few in number, very, very small number proportionally now to when it was there for Lord Spiritual. It seems like the newspapers and TV have taken over guiding the people, like Everyone Do What Jeremy Vine Says, or Simon Cowell, or the game show host, are the leaders of the people. You see, who is in control of the people now, really, is who is, packing the stadium, who is packing the TV studio, who is getting everyone to copy their fashions, who is getting everyone to do these behaviours, these ritualistic behaviours, which, not everyone is doing, because we've got a lot of crime through the roof, because some people actually don't, like that, or they're not getting a good deal out of life, and they haven't got any money because of the disproportionate wealth, which also, we'll get to that because that's illegal, because remember, a lot of these people were their own bosses. Unless they were serfs or on land, working on land, they were all of the trades and skilled craftsmen. They were, all these petitions to Parliament, the very, very old ones, are mainly to do with taxation on the trade, affecting their trade, foreign imports on trade, all these different skilled people who worked for profit. Or actually, there were loads and loads of businesses ended up getting taken over, which is what the Luddites kicked off about later on, because really, when those very first really massive, huge mills opened in Derbyshire and Nottingham, and Telford and Industrial Revolution, then you're getting people don't work for a profit anymore. They work for a wage. They work for someone else's profit, and they just get compensated. And as that takes over, you know, they're not working for a profit. They're working for someone else's profit. And this is why we don't have anybody petitioning Parliament about no individuals or members of the public petitioning the House of Commons about trade and business, because they don't own a business. It's all lobbying. All those petitions to the House of Commons have now transformed into business ownership lobbyists, and now BlackRock Vanguard own it. You know, it's not the people anymore petitioning about that, because they don't have any profits. It's all gone to these big sharks that have bought everything up, which is actually illegal because they're holding all the money. Therefore, it's not a profit to all the realm. It's only profit to a minority of persons, which, you know, I've said in another video the other day that it would be illegal under the Constitution for everyone to give all their money to one charity, unless that charity was just giving it all back to everyone else. But you can't. If everyone in England gave their money to Bill Gates, that would be illegal because it's not a profit to all the realm. He's not allowed to hold all the money, which I've kind of worked out in the Constitution. So, you know, but back then, you know, it was open sport. You know, people who were weavers, potters, you know, farmers. They're all different kinds of people. You know, even though there's landowners, but you know, you've already, you know, people had skills. You know, people had trades. You know, and there were a lot more profiting companies. Although I suppose people do profit when they all sell books on Amazon, but you know, they profit in an extremely small minority compared to the you know, Bezos, who owns the whole thing, you know, and you know, eBay or whatever. So right, so basically we've got these. It's mainly meant to be, so the origins of Parliament is mainly what William Prynne is trying to put across. Lord Spiritual, right? Spiritual leaders. And then it ends up being, you know, barons and spiritual leaders, landowners, basically, who are knights, but they end up being called barons. It's interesting that, you know, the word bar is almost like a lance, you know, holding a lance, like it's a long bar. You know, that's another thing to think about, but that's just my own thoughts. So Prynne is interested in rights and law, and obviously if he was worried about and involved with John Bastwick and Henry Burton, then he was really concerned about justice, right, and rights. But this guy in his books is the guy who's actually he suggests and proposes something like the Tumultuous Petitioning Act, right? And obviously, like, because he's getting a lot of books published, I think the government and the king pick up on this. Although, so with the Restoration and so forth, he's actually a key figure. Prynne is actually a key figure behind the Tumultuous Petitioning Act. But obviously it doesn't take away people's rights. But he's opposed to, like, these tumultuous disorders, because apparently, you know, he doesn't believe that MPs should be stopped on their way into Parliament or prevented from going to Parliament by riots or anything like that, you know, obstructed from doing their job and so forth. But he does believe in rights, you know, but just, like, you know, done properly. So he's one of the guys behind this Tumultuous Petitioning Act. But also the good thing about that act is that if you use the act properly, you get your rights acknowledged and recognised through the courts. But he didn't have to if it was under a certain amount of people. Now, this is interesting because, you know, William Penn is the person who gets a lot more recognition than Prynne. Although if you go to university and you do history, you probably, you know, people from Oxford and Cambridge probably know Prynne more. But to the average punter, to the average member of the public, it's William Penn who gets the accolade, because of the trial at the Old Bailey, which was a tumultuous disorder. It's interesting that William Prynne was responsible for the Tumultuous Petitioning Act, but William Penn gets the recognition for the Tumultuous Assembly, and then the whole plaque on the Old Bailey and the jurors, rights for conscience. But it was all actually an argument about whether or not they were or were not doing a petition, and whether it was acting with agency or not. So that's quite important. And then, William Penn's got his own story, going over to, the colonies in America and so forth, and sort of like, he plays a kind of influential role on the American Constitution, and also in the 1688 Bill of Rights later on. But Prynne is actually a key person in the whole Tumultuous Petitioning Act, and the Civil War as well. So his writing and work is very, very important when you want to prove privileges and petitioning rights to Parliament, which is what I'm on with reading now. But I just wanted to kind of like get down some of the important things. I haven't actually finished reading it all yet. I'm probably not going to read all of it either, but I was only reading what I need to read. Right, so then there's another couple of things that Prynne has set out. So he doesn't believe that oaths are lawful. He thinks that they're not in line with the ancient customs of the realm. Prynne doesn't believe that taking oaths or being forced to take an oath is lawful. And he was saying this in the 1640s, right? He's saying in the 1640s that according to his study in the Tower of London and, at Lincoln's Inn, that he doesn't think oaths are legal because they're even though he supported the restoration of the crown, because he just doesn't believe that they're in line with the ancient rights and customs of the realm, because you've been held to certain things that and this is why you see the oaths used to say in the oath it said that it's your requirement to uphold the rights and liberties of the subjects, right? But you got to swear allegiance to the king. Now Prynne believes that it's all religious. It's all to do with like the Popish plot and being faithful to the Protestant religion and not to Pope, not to the Pope. There's a lot of it to do with the power of God. He's God the supreme judge. Can religion and God take precedent over the king? Right? Is it really about Pope Francis, or is it actually really about God? Or not Pope Francis, or just the Pope, right? Or God. This is the thing. Was there an ulterior motive behind it as well, just, for allegiance to the king? There's a lot of questions to be raised, but what I find now is that they've really, really redacted and edited down and summarised these oaths, so there's absolutely no urgency to protect our rights and liberties anymore. It's all complete and utter allegiance. But now it's for it's not really anything to do with like don't follow Pope Francis, follow the king, or or the king's above God or something like that, rather than all this kind of like saluting the flag in America and singing the national anthem and all this national pride and all this. It very much is like a worship of the royals, the whole Coronation Street tune, the whole kind of like rigmarole of it all. But we didn't have these oaths, there wasn't a requirement for it, because apparently the realm was meant to be run for the profit of all the people and for the liberties and for the better good. For the the king's peace meant to be to keep the peace, right? It's not meant to be an idol or something, It's not meant to be some kind of like golden, like in Indiana Jones, some golden statue, that you find in some kind of Aztec cave or something like that. That you just work, like we're not bowing to the sun coming up on a morning. It's not meant to be like that. So Prynne is not. in the belief that we should have these oaths, right? So, what about, what about all these, knight barons and these religious figures? Well, you see, with the country as a Christian religion, all the saints and the missionaries have already been out, from halfway through the Roman Empire, and then all through the Anglo-Saxon period. So we're all Christianized, right? In Christianity. So really, the Pope, what was the head of the church, was kind of like the leader of the spiritual leader of all people. But that's different to owners of land who own and control land, right? So meeting up with these spiritual leaders, if you're the king, if you want to be in control of the people, you got to meet with them and discuss and talk how the country's going to be run, and also the people who own the lands or who've taken over ownership of the lands, right, and who are going to have the military force, right? So, but they're saying that they weren't these like oaths, because you see, with the religion, you've got Christian. If the country's Christian and you've got these values in the Bible, like sins and morals and all that, people who follow the religion, that's what the religious leaders profess that. So there wasn't no need to particularly for a ruler, because everyone was meant to behave themselves under the church, right? So. And obviously, you've already got laws in place. You follow the law, but they were still having things like trial-like combat at that point as well. Remember, but then we've got this judgment of peers thing as well. So, so there's that. There's the oath thing. What was the other thing? There was the oaths. Then what else was there then? Right, yeah. So basically you've got these like spiritual leaders, bishops, abbots, knights, barons, and then you've also got great men as well. But I don't know what that actually means, because they didn't actually get the House of Commons until later on. I think it was around 1300 when they had two houses. But the elected people as well and sent them in. But most of the MPs to start with were landowners and they were knights. And then they started having people who kind of owned land but were citizens. But while they were elected, I think they were called Knights of the Shire. Now, and one of the other things that Prynne claims is that he doesn't believe that MPs can lose their seats once they're elected, right? Until next Parliament's called. He doesn't believe that MPs can vote in Parliament to remove any other MPs, or that they can't lose their seats if they've been voted in and elected by the people, right? Now, at the moment, all through history, they have been deciding their seats in Parliament. And then in 1886 and leading up to then, because of corruption in Parliament, they actually opened it up to the courts. Now, this is what we're arguing about now. Because, James Stone MP and when they had this general election debate from this big petition with 3 million signatures, they tried to make out that, Parliament can't debate seats of its MPs, no matter what, if you call it general election or just call it recall of all or some MPs, right? Because of corruption, the 1868 Act only says that courts may also debate MPs, because otherwise it was privileged previously to that. So courts can hear election petitions, but there's nothing stopping Parliament from debating it, because they can debate affairs of Parliament, if you trust them to. So it's now Parliament are trying to make out that Parliament can't do it, only the King or the Prime Minister can call it. They can't debate it when they can, because I've got even that there's some also some acts of law which make committee which set out committees for doing it anyway. So and there's just loads of records through history of petitions, but William Prynne doesn't think that they should be doing it. It doesn't, which means that according to William Prynne, they shouldn't even be having election petitions, even in the courts, or debating it in Parliament. Parliament is saying that they can't debate the seats of their MPs anymore. It has to be decided in the court and then sent to the Speaker, right? So who's right? William Prynne thinks none of them are right. The MPs think that they can't do it, only the courts can. The truth is that they lied, and according to the actual modern legislation, they can do it as well as the courts. Prynne doesn't think that any MPs can lose their seats once they've been elected by the citizens. But there's another thing that's actually, I think, more important than election petitions and losing their seats. And this is the fact that Prynne is also setting out that, according to his study, actually, if someone can't be in Parliament, can't get to Parliament, then they can send someone else in their place to represent them if they can't be there, right? Because there were certain bishops and abbots and so forth summoned, right, to the early parliaments. And remember, it's not always that word. That word was put in later on, a French word, right? To talk, to speak, because they're only meeting to talk and speak and decide things, right? Like conference. So, now, some of them, while we're under the Pope, while the religion's under the Christianity before it becomes, separated from, under the King's religion rather than, the whole Christianity itself, right? Sometimes the bishops might have been ill, or the abbots, and sometimes they didn't call them back again. They just didn't call them back. Certain ones, I don't know if they didn't want to come back, or if they didn't like them, or if there was certain ones being represented, or whatever, or maybe they had some kind of thing, or rota, I don't know. But sometimes they were away, like on missions or going over to the continent or whatever, and they just weren't here, right? But what he says is that if some of these barons or lords, sometimes at these great councils or sometimes at the parliaments, if they couldn't be there, right, they could send someone to go in their place, right? And William Prynne thinks that is a legal right. Now, that means that if all the citizens have elected someone, right, but he's ill or he can't be there, right, then you're not going to have anyone representing, are you? Because, if Matt Hancock is, I'm a celebrity, get me out of here, over in the jungle, they were complaining that, he couldn't be in his surgery and he wasn't there for his constituents, right? Now, you might not think, if someone hasn't been elected, then you shouldn't think that, well, they shouldn't, no one else should have the right to go in because only that person's been elected. But remember, the public needs someone to go represent them in Parliament. And they've got a legal right for someone to go represent them in Parliament, don't they? Right? Because that's the point. Why would you invest your power into someone, lay your hands on someone, go fill some forms in a ballot box, right? If they weren't going to be there, if the public in Cornwall invest their power into an MP to go represent them in Parliament, but he's off of Matt Hancock in the jungle, that's a bit of a waste of a vote in the ballot box, isn't it? Now, if he's ill or if he's away, then really you should go nominate someone to go represent for him, because the people deserve someone, right? Now maybe it gets a bit sketchy, like if that's a way for them to get a proxy in, who like two MPs, he can juggle it between him and someone else, right? But the thing is, at the end of the day, it's better to have someone than no one, surely. It's better to have if you're in Cornwall and you've got all your constituents, and you're in Parliament, it doesn't really matter if you vote for who do you want to represent, Tom, Dick, or Harry, right? It's like if everyone votes for Dick, right, and that's who they want to represent them, but he just can't be there, or he's ill, then even if someone called Luke goes in, that he nominates someone to go in for him because he just can't be there, and everyone complains because they didn't vote for Luke, but at least they've got someone there. At least there's someone more than no one, because surely those constituents deserve to have someone there than no one there, right? Now, when I read that, it suddenly kind of like clicked in my brain what's been going on and how we're being gypped off by these major parties, right? Because when we're watching TV and when we're watching these debates, there's hardly anyone there. I mean, when George Galloway was in Parliament, he stood up talking and there's about, 8 people in the room. There's no one there because they don't care. They're not interested. Oh, I'm not going in for this debate. I'm not going in for that debate. We're not interested in this. We're not interested in that. Or we'll just let it go. Oh, there's only 8 people turned up to vote, and we'll just let the vote go because we know certain people are going to turn up. It's going to go one way or the other, right? Or whatever strategies they've got. And remember, the whole House is dominated by primarily 2 main parties. So, they know exactly what stuff's on the agenda and going to be voted on what days, and how many, if the other party really don't like that policy, and if they're going to get any opposition, and how many people they need to back their own vote up and so forth, right? But remember that these people are meant to be representing the constituents, the people, what the people want them to vote for, and what the majority of people want. And the people don't always vote for a Labour manifesto. This is when you get, Keir Starmer saying, if you don't vote how I tell you, you'll never stand for this party again, which basically means that, you all voted for Labour, you're just going to do what Labour wants. Well, why turn up at all then? If you've all ticked a manifesto box and, right, we're doing all those things, right, then why vote? Why go into Parliament? Why do the MPs need to vote legislation through? Because if you vote for Labour and Keir Starmer wins control of the Parliament and he's the Prime Minister, and he said, oh, well, every single voter in this country supports me because we got the majority, right? So they automatically, by default, vote my way in the chamber. So what's the point in them turning up? What's the point in them turning up and putting their hand up? It's a charade. It's already determined in that case, which means that they're not actually voting on it. They've already decided, right? And this is what I've said about the local council, because it's not like a court, right? You can't go into a court, right, and set a 12-month calendar out and say, right, we're going to vote in a jury. They're all Labour, right? They don't like criminals, so they're going to find them all guilty, right? And then say, right, well, there's no point going into court and hearing the evidence because we're going to fuck you anyway, right? We're going to find you all guilty, every single person, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, January, February, March, April, May, all the way through the year. We don't need to see the evidence. We're going to build 500,000 houses. You can't oppose them. There's no point seeing the plans or designs for them in the council. There's no point seeing the architect plans. Kier have designed them, and Taylor Wimpey. We've got it in his manifesto. And that fucking council's going to slam that hammer down and fucking vote every single fucking building project through, because that's a manifesto. We don't need to see any evidence. We don't care what the public think. The Labour majority voted for us in, and that's it. So there's no case. There's no case to hear. There's no evidence to hear. There's no point calling anyone into court. Everyone can go on holiday, except the builders who are going to build the houses. So you turn up at a general election, vote Labour, that's it. No one has to go into Parliament ever again. for the rest of the year, for the next 5 years, to send the builders in, which is what they did through lockdown. That's what they did through the pandemic. Everyone go home, everyone get on a lilo, sit in the sunshine, get a lemonade out, and let the fucking key workers do the work. Let the builders do the job. There's nothing to object to. There's nothing to... All the councillors can stay at home because all the builders are going to do now is fucking build the manifesto, right? That's what Keir Starmer thinks the country should run like, which is, it basically is going into the chamber and it's a show, it's a charade, because, you know, if any of his Labour people, you know, don't put their hand up when he's, you know, then they're not in the party, they're kicked out of the party, right? And this is the thing. If Matt Hancock's in the jungle, right, then he should send someone. That chamber should be full every single time that it is in session. Because if an MP can't get there, right, then he should send someone else to represent him so they can vote on his behalf and on the constituents' behalf, so they can speak on the constituents' behalf. But, you know, no one can speak in that chamber because, you know, the speaker don't point his finger at anyone sometimes. Nigel Farage don't get pointed at, you know. In fact, I think that's what Nigel Farage is doing. You know, he's like trying to be the speaker, he's like trying to get Lindsay Oil to point at him. You know, he's pointing at Lindsay Oil. This is the thing, right? So, that chamber should be full every single time, and then if an MP can't get there to vote, he should send someone else to vote. Every single seat in the House should be filled by an MP or someone to take their place, right? Because that's what the electors have a right to have someone in there to vote on their behalf, right? Because if they aren't, what's the point in having an MP? And this is the thing, if the MP is in Parliament voting, he can't be in the surgery meeting constituents, can he? So where's this person to meet people in the office? This is the thing, no one can get surgery with an MP. No one can meet an MP because he's only by himself. So if he's in Parliament, he's not in his constituency office that day. And if he's in his constituency office, he's not in Parliament. But what's the point in having a secretary? What's the point in having, assistants, right? If he's in Parliament, then you go and meet his assistant or his nominee, and then you explain it to them, and they write it down, and they tell him. And this is the thing. This means that hardly anyone's getting to meet an MP in surgery, you know, if they get the 10 minutes or whatever, because the MP can't be in two places at once. So not only should there be someone actually going into Parliament to represent in the chamber, if he can't be there, when he is there in the chamber, there should be someone in the surgery there to meet with you and not wait until he comes back, because you've got a legal right to speak to someone about parliamentary matters in person, because that's the thing. So, and really, this is when you realise that Labour don't want to why do Labour MPs and Tory MPs want to see you in the constituency office if you're not a member of the Labour? If you're a member of the Labour Party, why the hell would you want to go in and see them? You know, you've subscribed to their manifesto. What's the problem? You know, unless they want to lobby in some business deals. This is the thing. You know, they don't want to see anyone else who's got their own opinion, their own view. You know, they didn't vote for Labour, they didn't vote for Conservative, they're independent. You know, that'd be all right if the calendar were filled up for 10 days a week, you know. It's just too much for the MP to, represent. But, you know, people sign petitions and people collect votes and people get to take the initiative over Labour voters who don't necessarily have opinion on this or that, right? Because Labour voters sometimes, you know, aren't bothered about everything, but other people are bothered about certain things. So this is it. We're being gypped off. They don't actually want to meet with us really in surgery, and we're having trouble getting petitions published now because they're lying and making stuff up like, oh, standards. Oh, well, standards. Where's the standards of having the right to have someone represent you in Parliament in every single decision that's made and vote? Where's that standard? Standards, you know? Oh, we got the right to have an MP if he's not in the jungle playing jungle gym, you know, Matt Hancock. So this is the thing, right? So, you know, we're being gypped off. Now, this brings you into the suffragettes, right? Why do the suffragettes make so much hassle, right, over 100 years to get the official vote, right, when women used to usually vote, you know, in agreement with their husband as a household, right? They wanted their own independent vote, you know. So, you know, when the thing is, not everyone's voting now. Only like, you know, 60 whatever percent, 2/3 of people, and sometimes only half the people, are bothering to vote now. Does that seem to me like, you know, there's any point in trying to get the vote for everyone when not everyone is even using it, and not even really all the women? And then what even really blows my mind when I think about it now is that it's like this. It was like this, you know, Donald Trump or Kamala Harris thing, right? You know, it's like, you know, red or blue or heads or tails, right? Tory or Labour, Starmer or Sunak, you know, they're only either voting for Team A or Team B or Lib Dems. It is toss a coin. Now, this is the thing, right? If there's only two main parties, right, and it's either going to be, you know, A or B, one or two, you know, Labour or Tory, right? If there's only two things to choose from, why the fuck does it matter if there's 10 people voting, 100 people voting, 1,000 people voting, or 1 million people voting? Because it's like, you know, who's going to win a tennis match or who's going to win a football game, you know? You know, it's at the end of the day, there's only two teams playing. So it's not really, all it's doing is making each team stronger, but it's still the same game. You know, it's almost like, you know, how many people can you fit in your rowing boat for Oxford or Cambridge? You know, it's like Oxford have got, you know, 2 people in each boat or 4 people in each boat or 20 people in each boat or 2 fucking, you know, admiral ships, you know. At the end of the day, right, you might as well, you know, chuck 2 ball tops in a river and watch them float down and see which one's going to win, because there's only 2 of them. To me, it's pointless, because it's literally like, you know, getting 2 wind up, you know, toys and seeing which one's going to win, or having, you know, 50 strongmen pulling a truck up a hill, you know, Team A and Team B. Because you're just doing more and more people doing the same thing. What they're doing is, as more and more people got the vote, they needed to shepherd. So now it's like, you know, shepherd. You know, it's literally like Farmer 1 and Farmer 2. You know, it's like Farmer A versus Farmer B. You know, and all actually, it's not actually about people going to vote really for any decision or thing. It literally is, can Farmer A get more sheep into his pen than Farmer B, right? That's what it is. Because all those sheep have complained that they want to vote, but all they've done is said, oh, well, now I can be either Farmer A's sheep or Farmer B's sheep, where farmers weren't allowed to have female sheep in their pens. You know, well, we've only got male sheep in these pens. Now we can have male and female sheep in these pens. We've got bigger pens, but we've only got 2 pens. Which pen do you want to go in? So, you know, to me, it's insane, because everyone's under arrest by these parties. And, you know, anything other than partisan politics to express your opinion, you're being reduced, you're being restricted and inhibited from getting access to any services, really, to get or meet anyone. I mean, I was the closest I've got to. Well, I did get something signed off by an MP once, Barry Sheeman, and he wasn't even my MP. I didn't know. It was like slightly out of the area, out of bounds. I got something signed off by an MP, and I was going to go meet Matt Eastwood, but he shut down like the day before, so I never got to see him, which is a shame, really. He was only in for one term because of the pandemic shut down. So, you know, it's you do more yourself. You know, if you do petitions, if you make a fuss, if you do complaints or whatever, you can get more done. But this is when you find out the government are corrupt. So I know what I've discovered. This is true and correct. You complain about it. Like DVLA, the chief executive of DVLA. Oh, this driving license proves that your department's corrupt and lying. Well, what do you think we're gonna do? Confess? No. We're gonna keep the lie going on. With the driving licenses and the vehicle weights and so forth. So this is it. Corrupt. And this is what William Prynne was calling out on all these different things, like the right to have someone else represent if your MP can't be there, or the right that we shouldn't necessarily be held to these particular oaths, which are against our ancient rights and customs, or MPs can't actually be removed once they've been elected, until there's another election. But we're meant to be electing magistrates, sheriffs, and other figures as well. So that's basically what Prynne is about. He's quite less known, but some of his books are actually really quite complicated and technical. But a lot of it's in Latin. All these different parliamentary writs, which I'm just kind of getting into now to try and. So Prynne is well before the 1688 Bill of Rights. So he's got all of the knowledge of what actually are the rights to Parliament, the parliamentary privilege and petitioning rights before it was put into the Constitution. What actually was it? Because some people were getting prosecuted or arrested when they were petitioning things the king didn't like, like putting the Star Chamber, like John Bastwick and Henry Burton, which is mainly religious arguments, but he's not just, getting recognised for bringing a cause or prosecuting a case or, having a warrant. And back then, remember, people are getting arrested for, owing each other money in tort cases and things like that, which we don't realise that we've got that privilege now. But I think on the most of it, we're being gypped off the whole way, particularly how money has gone. Political parties have taken over Parliament as much as these big corporations have taken over business, So now we're not making profits ourselves. The big companies make the profits, and we're not getting our own policies and arguments into Parliament. It's the main parties that are getting their policies in. So the main parties have taken over policy and manifesto in the same way that big corporations have taken over profit, right, for themselves. So the political parties have taken over, like, the political process of petition, investigation, evidence gathering, and their policies, which they're debating and getting voted through, is all owned by Labour and Tory policy, right? And the big companies and businesses have taken all the profits, all the money off us. We don't have the money, and it's the money usually which, you can use to advertise and promote these things independently. So we're being seized, and even the government, and then it's not only being seized, they've taken all our political voice from us and, independent policy, and they've taken all the money from us, and the actual government itself, now they're selling it off. They're giving it away. Like Cameron's giving it away to private companies. He's giving the government away. He's dismantling it bit by bit. So, Jeff Bezos can have, the NHS and, sell Royal Mail to the Germans or whatever. And, and Gordon Brown's giving all the assets away, the gold, and he's running it. He's actually run it bankrupt. The government's not in profit. And any money that they do have, like these brownfield funds, they're just giving it to builders, I can't afford anything at the moment, but I'll give all the money to, Taylor Wimpey. So they're actually, all the tax money that's coming in, they're putting into these funds, which they're just giving to all the builders, giving them to all the highways departments. It's already planned, there's a big pot of gold, right? All this is going to all these developers, architects, and people like that. Don't worry, that's all this taxpayer money of the people's is to the profit of these companies now, and not even at cost price. Because when we own all the highways departments and we own the electricity companies and we own the Royal Mail, they aren't running for a profit. They're running for us. In fact, because we're profiting, because you profit when it doesn't cost you anything. Because when you're getting your mail delivered in electricity, and you don't have to pay out set cost price, you aren't out of pocket. You keep your money, right? So you're in profit because you're not in a loss in the first place, right? Well, from your wages, never mind, you're not in profit, you're not in a loss because you're not paid anything because you own it. When you own it, you don't have to pay for it. So you keep that money, right? So you've got some money rather than not having some money. Then you can use that money on something else, like, oppose the government. But when they've taken all the things off you, you see they're putting the prices up through the roof now and demanding even more money. You can't afford anything. So it's a heist, and it's all criminal and illegal, the whole thing. And this is just me having a very brief stint on looking into these histories and things and finding these. So God knows what some of these historians must be the devil's advocate. Some of these university professors, historians, Dr. Brodie Waddell, Karen Bowie, they must have some real demons in their closets, like William Prynne, because they if I found out, this amount of corruption just from, a small amount of time being put into history and research and, finding out what's going on, then some of these history teachers, some of these university lecturers must be sitting on some real golems and literally demons. They must know a hell of a lot of what the government's doing corrupt. Are they challenging them the money? And have they been put under some kind of grooming, conditioning, training, staff training. They're being trained into these kind of like TV presenter work people who just go along, roll with it, news reporters, there's an incident, don't question it. Is this a setup? Did someone stage it? Am I just being, led around like someone ringing the police up, sending them here, sending them there, sending them everywhere, this is the thing, but this is the thing with the news being corrupt as well, because, they need big stories. The newspapers, they lie, they don't tell the truth. So, it's become a stage show. I from what the BBC are doing now with their programmes like sort of Doctor Who and things like that, it's all kind of like Harry Potter type, wand waving and turning up at pageants and, getting the costumes out and buying the merchandise, buying the stuff, and actually they're even now inviting people on there, go to the BBC, turn up at these things, get involved, actually, turn up in the studio, be in the programme. And how I'm thinking of it now with all this security, surveillance and so forth is that they're actually bringing the movie into the lives of the people, or wanting them to step into the programme And they even had, they even sort of had that passenger thing, didn't they? On that episode when they kind of all go into it. So with all this kind of like, queuing up for Harry Potter wands and having they're beckoning people onto the stage, but the stage actually is like the Truman Show. That it's like lights, camera, and action, and when they've got all the kids lining up with the Harry Potter wands and you're turning up at the pageants and everything, and like some kind of like some conference, some kind of like Comic Con or whatever conference, it's they're directing. You've got a producer, a director, set design. They're actually they're making. Well, this is why they call them acts in the acts of law, but they're doing it now to such an extent where they're even calling them in. Get in front of the camera. All the kids can. It's kind of like real life things. So it's almost kind of like that. They're making. It's going to be, your life is the program, and they're filming it, and you've been directed. And I don't think that is what life's meant to be. I don't think that we're all meant to be directed and produced. I think that it's just meant to be, it's not natural, is it, to be produced and directed, not to the extent where they've got all these characters and programs which they designed and they created. I mean, you might as well start, putting acts of law through Parliament, like, the Harry Potter Act, so it be enacted by His Majesty's, and it be enacted by the Lords Temporal and Spiritual that every child under 16 shall have a wand and broom and shall have a Harry Potter name and so forth. And on a Tuesday, it's getting to be kind of like that, the Harry Potter Act, or, the Doctor Who Act, or whatever, and behaviours, and even all the easy script, it's like, give us Keir Starmer, oh, it's the new education secretary, oh, come on, children, come to school on a Tuesday, here's your script, right? And talk about staff training, right? This is it. On a Tuesday, right? You turn up at school, like, here's your script, this is what you'll say today, right? It's like, oh, hello, Luke. Oh, hello, miss. Can I go to the toilet, please? No. Oh, you've gone off script. This is like Dominic Cummings. This is what Dominic Cummings is talking about when he's saying that Parliament's all scripted. What they're actually going to do in schools, right, is like when your kids go into school, you don't sit there and talk to people like, oh, hello, Sally. What did you do today? I went with my mum to take my little brother to the nursery, and then I'm coming to school. Oh, what are you doing on Tuesday? I'm not sure yet. I might go to the Skegness. Oh, no, you've gone off script. No. You say this or that. You see, this is what they're doing on TV. They've got all the audience, and they've got Zoe Ball, and then you come up here and stand there, face the camera, and then, now you spin the wheel, and then when I say this, then you answer the questions, and you do what I say, because this is our show, and everyone watches this, and this is what we all do. This is grooming and training. And this is why I don't like these game shows. This is why I don't like what they're doing to the world, because it's like, it's scripted life. If you've got scripted life, like who wants, when you're born, right? This is what Starmer wants to do, right? This is what the New Labour, this is what Angela Rayner, here's your script, right? Angela Rayner, going to school with the kids, oh, we've put some acts of law through for you all now. This is the Luke Simpkins Act, and this is the John Jeffries Act, and this is the, Claire Wilkins Act, and this is the Thomas Horner Act. She was fucking handing acts of law out. These are statutory instruments. It's music. It's a music class. Oh, now Keir Starmer's put statutory instruments through for you all now. This is the Tony Blair, mechanisms of implementation, right? This is what Tony's got lined up for you all with Davos, right? You know, your kids will go to school, and they're learning maths, learning English, you've gone off script, this is the Luke Learns Math Act, It's, now you're reading a maths book, but in between reading the maths book and doing PE, you've got to walk down the corridor and you've got to keep on the left-hand side and you've got to nod and smile at everyone and say, yes, sir, no, sir, 3 bags full, sir. You can't, oh, there's a butterfly at the window. Oh, that looks nice, a butterfly, I'll go have a look at it. No. Get down, you're suspended from school, you went off script, a butterfly, flapped against the window and, you stopped, or whatever. You've gone off script, there are footmarks on the floor, 1, 2, 3, 4, you went off footmarks, you got to keep with the pace when you're walking down the corridor, follow the footmarks, when the footmarks light up. It's like Twister. This is where you got to put your feet when you walk down the fucking corridor. This is Tony Blair, right? This is the world that Blair and Rayner and Starmer are building. Scripted life, costume room, set design, lights, camera, action. This is what the police want. And if you go off script, you'll get arrested, you'll get fined. This is what Mark Rowley wants, He wants everyone to go to the script, right? And at the moment, they've introduced a load of rebel characters who really, 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 really don't like this game, and they're rebelling against it. All these foreign immigrants who don't believe in our values and are poor and haven't got any money, they're not going with it. They're not taking to it too well. Therefore, all the more to enhance the lights, camera, and action. We need more cameras. We need more. It's like a well-funded movie. The police chief's like, oh, this movie's not funded enough. We need more. We need more stuff. We need more barriers. We need more roadblocks. We need more barbed wire. We need more locks and keys and handcuffs and truncheons. This is the thing. It's getting bizarre. It really is just utterly and completely bizarre. And what's the most bizarre thing is that absolutely none of it follows the law. The worst people for not following the law and the worst people going off script are the government themselves. Are the government, because they have broken their own laws. They've broken the laws, and what they really don't want is the the Government of Corrupt Act, the official institutional corruption act. You are official, the official Monster Raving Loony Party, the official corrupt Labour Party. The official, you are a corrupt government act. And the thing is, they're not acting, they are corrupt.